The mystery of life isn't a problem to solve, but a reality to experience. A process that cannot be understood by stopping it. We must move with the flow of the process. We must join it. We must flow with it.
This is Dune's main theme summarized in one perfect paragraph. You might have watched this movie and muttered to yourself, what's with the bull? What does the worm mean? What's with the dreams and even that little mouse that Paul sees twice? Well, they all tie directly into Dune's theme. Dune, like all great movies, is chock full of hidden details, messages, and motifs that nod to its theme. In this video, we're doing a deep dive on some of them, and I mean deep. I took 4 full pages of notes watching this movie the other day. Let's start with the bull. Paul says that his grandfather fought bulls for sport.
And grandfather fought bulls for sport.
Yes. Look where that got him.
There's also loads of other bull imagery in this movie, including the bull head and the bull statue in Paul's room. Dune wants audience members to walk away with the lesson that we must flow with the process of life to understand it. We must join it. And what does a bullfighter do? They wave a red flag to draw the bull's attention and sidestep the bull at the last second, joining with the movement of this animal. It's a dance, and a dance can only be performed when you're coordinating your movements with a partner. Water. The homeworld of House Atreides is one of water, in stark contrast to the deserts of Arrakis. In one respect, this clashing of settings shows just how out of their element House Atreides is when they first arrive on Arrakis. And it magnifies the importance of Dune's theme to surrender to the mystery of life. Paul, out of his element, must surrender to the forces of nature and the ways of the Fremen in order to survive in the desert. But I think water means something else too. When speaking about life, Dune's theme says that we must flow with it. What better visual metaphor than water to show the necessity to flow with life? The Fremen value water above all else, metaphorically showing their conviction that we must flow with reality. Above Paul's bed on Arrakis is a mural of koi fish in the water. Koi fish are from Japan, and speaking of Japan, there's also a reference to bonsai trees that we see early in this film. I don't know why the filmmakers decided to put in these references to Japan in this movie, but I do know that koi fish swimming in water could represent the flowing with life that is mentioned in Dune's theme. The bonsai trees, just as a side note, connect back to this film's numerous references to trees, namely the sacred palms that House Harkonnen planted and kept in their garden. When Paul watches a hologram teaching him about Arrakis, the narrator says,
"What scant plant life exists on Arrakis is thanks to the Fremen, who have cultivated deep-rooted tyrannic plants."
Later, when he's attacked by the Hunter-Seeker, he hides behind the hologram of the roots to conceal himself, foreshadowing his ability to survive in the desert. All of this to say that nothing flows quite as well as liquid, obviously, and water reinforces Dune's theme perfectly. The sea. What do dunes look like? They look almost like waves in the ocean to me. The sea, I believe, is a big metaphor in this movie. Remember that sand and sea are inexorably linked. They always will be. And I think that shot of Paul putting his hand underneath of the water and touching the sand right before he leaves his homeworld was a nice touch by the director to show Paul will eventually liberate the people of Arrakis. He will be that bridge between the people of sea power and the people of desert power. Not to mention the visual metaphor of a sandworm swimming underneath of the desert. It kind of reminded me of a whale, to be honest with you, the sandworm. Then you have the big sandstorm halfway through the movie, which kind of resembles a big tidal wave to a certain extent. Remember what Gurney says after he realizes House Harkonnen took 10 billion Solaris off Arrakis every year?
"They shall suck at the abundance of the seas, and the treasure hid in the sand."
Then we have the opening quote. Dreams are messages from the deep. The only thing I think about when I hear the deep is the ocean. That's literally it. I think it's obvious how a big body of water fits into Dune's theme to flow with the process of life. So I won't keep bashing you over the head with this spoken and visual motif. The elements. Leto is obsessed with the idea of desert power.
On Arrakis, we need to cultivate desert power.
He also mentions how House Atreides has sea power and air power.
Here on Caladan, we've ruled by air power and sea power.
What is the desert, though? It's sand, which is ground up rock. In other words, earth. And the Fremen live in sieches, which is made up of rock. They're caves underground. That's 3 of the 4 elements, so what about fire? I think House Harkonnen represents fire, or firepower, as evidenced by their explosive attack on House Atreides on that fateful night where they took Arrakis yet again. I mean, their attack looks like a cascading of fire raining down from the sky. It's pretty incredible. When Paul has his vision in the tent, he says,
I see unholy war spreading across the universe like unquenchable fire.
The Bene Gesserit lady says,
If he is the one, he has a long way to go. His sight is barely awakened, and now he goes into the fire.
how do the elements tie into Dune's theme? I'm not sure it's the elements themselves as much as the characters interacting with the elements. The sigil of House Atreides is an eagle. Eagles are in perfect harmony with their environment, using thermals and air currents in part to reach their destination. They have joined with the element of air and glide throughout the sky, flowing with it. The Fremen joined with the desert and the rock formations on Arrakis. They live in sieges, right? Not to mention the way they walk across the sand. Their walk is a dance-like motion with irregular rhythm, designed to mimic the natural sounds of the desert, with the purpose of not being detected by the sandworms. The Fremen represent the idea of flowing with life by joining with their environment. They are in equilibrium. It's telling that they're called the Fremen in this story, or free men. They know more about joining with the process of life than anybody in this movie. The worm. In my mind, the worm represents two things. One is life. It's a faceless, unstoppable force that recreates the surface of the earth. It swallows entire machines whole and immobilizes people on the dunes. When Hami says the fateful line about joining with the process, a montage of sand vibrating underneath of the sandworm is shown. For me, this is a clear giveaway that the worm represents the very thing we must join with. The process of life. Let's not forget that the final thing we see in this movie, off in the distance, is a Fremen riding a sandworm. We must move with the flow of the process, he says, and the process of life is change, isn't it? The sandworm remaking the dunes, changing the landscape of the desert, is a metaphor for the power of nature. And the Fremen riding the sandworm is such a beautiful representation of this idea that we must join with the process. Another significance of the sandworm is fear. I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear is gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. I will turn the inner eye to see its path, she says. When Paul finally comes face to face with the worm, his head is placed perfectly in the center of its mouth. It's framed perfectly. What imagery does that invoke for you? For me, the mouth of the worm looks like an eye, a visual representation of this famous quote from Dune. Animals. There's a lot of animal imagery in Dune Part 1, whether it's the beetle at Duncan Idaho's death, the dragonfly ships, the desert mouse, the bull, the koi fish, the eagle, the worm, and even that weird spider thing in House Harkonnen. The Bene Gesserit lady says,
If you had been unable to control your impulses like an animal, we could not let you live.
To me though, this goes contrary to the idea of joining with the flow of life. Animals are in equilibrium with their environment, no? For instance, the desert mouse has found ways to survive in the desolate deserts of Arrakis. Its impulses and intuition helped it to survive, no? The Bene Gesserit says that they can't let Paul live if he can't control his impulses. But it's Paul's impulses that help him survive the sandstorm. He trusts what he hears in his vision from a friend he doesn't yet have, and gives in to his intuition to surrender to the forces of nature. Perhaps the impulses animals have that allows them to blend in with their environment and survive is the very thinking Paul needs to become a leader and change the fate of Arrakis. Even the way the Fremen fight showcases equilibrium with their environment, the way they hide underneath of the sand and then expose themselves at the most opportune moment. I can't help but feel that animals are a huge motif in this movie for the way that they embody the film's theme. Also, remember the big metal tubes in orbit surrounding the different planets? They use them for space travel, I think. What do they look like to you? To me, it looks like a big metal worm, like the sandworm. Dr. Kynes says that equipment doesn't do well in the desert, and every time a sandworm comes for the harvesters, they have to lift it up above the ground. I think this shows visually the belief that The great houses can stop nature, they can stop life and bend it to their will, and continue about their business getting rich. As Hami says, the mystery of life isn't a problem to solve, but a reality to experience, a process that cannot be understood by stopping it. The great houses on Arrakis attempt to solve the problem of nature by avoiding the great sandworm and taming their environment. Meanwhile, the Fremen ride the sandworm, joining with it. Dune Part 1 is a beautiful movie, chock full of other visual motifs and themes and imagery that I didn't have time to cover today. If you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more film breakdowns like this one. Also, there's a written version of this video on my Substack. It's free to sign up. The link is down below in the description. I wanted to say thank you all so much for watching. I can't wait for Dune Part 2 coming out later this year. And I will definitely be making another video about Dune Part 2 later on. All right, see you next time.